Today we're making chicken chasseur from the classic French cookbook Larousse. We'll follow the recipe closely to understand the principles so you can make it your own. We start by making a very simple brown stock with some chopped chicken carcass. We'll simply put the whole thing in a preheated oven at 200 degrees Celsius for 30 to 35 minutes. The objective of the exercise here is A, to cause the Maillard reaction, what's going to make the chicken taste meaty. Later on, the caramelization, what's going to give it the nutty complexity. And later on, fond creation. This beautiful layer of golden brown is full of flavors from the two reactions we just talked about. And that's why we strategically used a casserole dish to allow us to mop up all the flavors. Simply cover just enough water. I'd rather have not enough water and later topping up than adding too much in one go, unnecessarily diluting flavors. Lid on, and we let this simmer for 30 minutes on the side while we cook the chicken. With moderate heat, we melt a very generous amount of butter. It is a French recipe after all. And butter is 15 to 20% water until the water has fully evaporated. It's impossible for this to go meaningfully above boiling point. So give it time to gently melt without burning the butter, during which we season our bird generously with salt, both sides. The book simply said pepper, so we're going to use white pepper for this, for some mellow heat. Once there's no longer steam coming out, we add our chicken pieces, dusting them in flour to create a thin coating to help promote browning and of course also contribute to a slight thickening of the sauce. As with many old school recipes that calls for only butter, it's tricky to get meaningful browning because butter has a smoke point of 150 degrees Celsius, and for any meaningful Maillard reaction to occur, the pan has to be above 140, so you have a 10 degrees Celsius safety margin to play with. And that's why the flour is extremely helpful in terms of browning. With more modern approaches, such as mixing butter with high smoke point oil or using high smoke point oil only, you can achieve meaningful browning much easier without the flour. In fact, the flour would start to burn at higher temperature. And that's why you don't see this technique utilized that often anymore. And to maintain heat and not crowd the pan, we'll do this in batches. Once everything is beautifully golden, and this is as far as you want to take it with the butter, we put the lid on, and this whole thing goes into a preheated oven at 160 Celsius to finish cooking gently. After steaming in its own juices for 15 minutes, our chicken's ready. Now the recipe calls for 2 smaller birds. If you're using 1 large chicken like me, there's a slim chance that the legs might be on the blue side, but we can always rectify that by adding them back to the sauce when we reduce to finish the cooking. Chicken pieces come out, we bring back some heat, and we add some sliced button mushrooms to saute. The mushrooms, which themselves are about 80 to 90% water content, will first mix with the chicken juices and taking some of the coating power from the flour. And through heat, we then evaporate the water content from the mushrooms and from the chicken cooking liquid to concentrate their flavors. The actual Larousse recipe, which I'm using the 2009 edition, actually only calls for the mushrooms to be sauteed for 1 to 2 minutes. So I suspect this is not for the browning, but for melding of flavors and for the mushrooms to really maintain their shapes for the presentation. After a couple of minutes, we skim off most of the fat, with just a layer coating the bottom of the pan. We add some shallots to sweat. And at this point, we cook them without color to evaporate their water content, to concentrate their flavors, the subtle sweetness in particular. Now, the recipe then calls for this to be flambéed with some cognac. Out of consideration for our camera up there, we'll cook out the alcohol a bit more gently. And cognac adds this deep, warm, fruity, slightly caramelized note and a roasted character. So if cost is not an issue, give it a try. It really adds a lot of depth. Now you can really see the power of that light dusting of flour. We have a relatively thick consistency. Now, once you can no longer smell the harshness of the cognac, we deglass the pan with some dry white wine. And this will bring brightness, this will bring fruity notes, this will bring acidity, balancing the richness of the butter and the cognac. Once the wine has been reduced, we add our brown chicken stock. And today I've skimmed off most of the fat just because of how much fat it rendered out. And now we bring in some heat to reduce this down. As promised, the legs, they go back in just to make sure they finish cooking properly. But again, the recipe is a guideline. Use a probe so that you're more comfortable. Make sure the dark meat gets above 70 degrees Celsius and the breast no higher than 67. Now, once you have the desired consistency, and I fished out the chicken to not overcook them, we lower the heat slightly and we add a tiny bit more butter. The milk solids and the fat will start to emulsify into the liquid, giving us this velvety shine to slightly thicken the sauce further. Perfect, chicken pieces, they go back in. And we finish with some chervil for some anise-like herbal notes to brighten up the dish. And some tarragon, one of chicken's best friends, for some distinctive licorice-like flavors. And that is Chicken Chasseur.